Well, the Liberal government, instead of offering up a budget to Canadians, have offered up the main estimates, which is, you can well imagine, a disaster waiting to happen. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name's Sterling. Before we get into this, I would encourage all of you to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Both of those things really help out the channel, and if you like the content, then subscribe and hit the notification bell. When I put up a new video, it'll pop into your feed and you can have a look at your leisure. All right, let's look after that. Well, Mark Carney is not going to give anybody a budget. He feels that he doesn't have to. Mr. Elbows Up, I'm an Oxford-educated economist who's looked after the Bank of Canada, who's looked after the Bank of Britain, who has a company that he claims to be the largest company or the most powerful company in Canada, Brookfield. And yet, all of those places wouldn't be able to function without a budget. All of those places wouldn't be able to release money to people without a budget. There's going to be departmental budgets. There's going to be overall budgets. There's going to be expenditures. All of those things are laid out in budgets. And you want me to believe that he can go ahead and run this country without a budget? Now, why would he want to do that? What's his motivation? Well, his motivation is twofold. His motivation, first of all, is to keep you from understanding where the money is going. And the other motivation, of course, is to keep you from realizing that he doesn't know what he's doing, right? So he can hide not only what he's doing, like what he's doing with this money that's essentially a blank check. If there's no budget, then we can't say to him, we gave you $1 billion for this. Why didn't you spend it on that? Just like you would have, say, give $100 to your spouse and they spent it at the racetrack. And you were like, but that was for groceries. Same thing. Mark Carney can give $26 billion to his friends. And don't realize that he didn't earn this money. Canada doesn't earn this money. Without taxing you for it, they don't have it. And you hear the conservatives say, well, it's $1,400 a year. So every $120 that the government takes off of your check in federal taxes goes directly to these consultants. But many people voted for Mark Carney because they said that he was going to be the financial person to get us out of this mess. Now all I hear him talking about is how he's gonna. It's going to take years for the Liberal government to finally approve a project. It is not going to be our number one export of petroleum. He's going to try to convince you that it's a half measure is somehow going to improve your life. We have the most expensive food, we have the most expensive housing, and we have the most expensive standard of living, which is strange because it's so low compared to the rest of the G7, and yet it's so expensive. These are the things that your government, your federal government especially, should be focusing on. Now he's going to try to convince you that that's the newest thing, right? That all these meetings he's having with the premiers is going to somehow create an economy. What I can't grasp is how people don't realize the history of it. The problem derived from not wanting one region's product to overtake another region's, right? I dare you to take milk from Newfoundland and try to sell it in Quebec. Or take milk from British Columbia and try to sell it in Quebec. Take milk from anywhere and try to sell it in Quebec. So what market are we talking about? I mean, Doug Ford said, oh, look, all the booze. Oh, yeah, no, that's great. That's excellent, because that's the kind of thing that we need to keep our families up and running. Alcohol. Our meat is so much more expensive. And yet the government is not offering to you any ideas on where the money that they're taking out of your pocket, out of your very bank account, out of your paycheck, and they're spending it on things. They're going to try to say buzzwords like dental care. You know what's funny in my head is they've stopped saying the free birth control. That's a clue. Then they'll say daycare, which everybody knows the entire system is collapsing because they are limiting the amount of seats that they can give, the spaces that can be generated, and nobody can afford to pay the private daycare. It's cheaper to stay home than it is to pay private daycare. It's cheaper to work in shifts than it is to pay private daycare. But the government doesn't care about that. They only throw these buzzwords at you, hoping that you'll never look into it. However, when you put up a budget, you have an obligation. When you put up a main estimate, that's just like me coming to you and say, I don't know, it probably costs $100. Then you give me that money, and I was like, well, it cost $26 billion. So we borrowed the rest, and now we're paying a debt load of $50 billion a year. We're not paying down the debt. So if you owe $1,000 on your interest payments because you're holding a $10,000 limit on your credit card, and you gave that $1,000 a month, that $10,000 limit is still sitting there. Like it's maxed out still. Well, that's what we're talking about with $50 billion. Now, I'll show you in the main estimates how they had to increase the payments to the medical center so that they could stop the conservatives from saying, oh, they pay more in interest than they do to the doctors. But in the end, I need you to remember, and I'll probably remind you because people seem to be forgetting. This money that they're spending is your money. It's not Canada's money. And we would have a lot more of it if we simply pulled the oil out of the ground. You could keep more in your pocket because then the corporate taxes would cover the costs that we're discussing. That's basic economics. And a man like Mark Carney, well, he should have learned that, at least at Oxford and Harvard. You would figure that basic economics would be taught to the economist. I'll leave a link to the article this is the breakdown of the government's expenditure plan and main estimates for 2025-26, directly from the Office of the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer, or Parliamentary Budget Officer, the PBO. This report examines federal expenditure plan and main estimates for 2025-26, which support the appropriation bill that seeks Parliament's approval of $222.9 billion in budgetary authority. So the government wants to spend $222.9 or $223 billion, and they don't want you to know where it's going. They're not telling you what they're spending it on. They're not telling you what they're using it for. They're not even telling you what it's going to be earmarked for. They're simply saying, give me it. Don't question me. That's what they're saying by not offering you a budget. They're saying, don't you dare question Mark Carney, Mr. CEO, I'm going to tell you how these things work without ever telling you how you can keep me in check or how I can be held accountable for all of the economic woes that I'm shoving onto your shoulders. $223 billion. So now we'll get back to the article or the report. It's not an article, it's a report. The government's main estimates for 2025-26. From now on, I'm just going to say 25-26 because outlined $486.9 billion in budgetary spending authorities. Voted authorities, which require approval by Parliament, are about $222.9 billion. Statutory authorities, for which the government already has Parliament's permission, $264 billion. Consistent with previous estimates, money transferred to other levels of government, individuals, and other organizations account for most of the planned spending in the main estimates, $294.8 billion, or 60.5%. These are going to the elderly, what they call the elderly benefits or the old age pension, the Canada Health transfer to the hospitals and the doctors and all of the people. The public debt charges, now that bothers me. It's $49.1 billion in interest payments. There's no reason for that. We should not be paying we should never have had to borrow this kind of money. We should have simply turned the taps on and let the money come into the government so that we can pay down the debt. Say what you want about Donald Trump, but he's changed he's lowered it now from $1 trillion to $360 billion. So that's a major cut down in the amount of money that he's sending out of the country. And we as Canadians need to be looking at that. We don't need to be looking at what he's doing for his outfit. We need to be seeing how our outfit can be doing it for us instead of talking it down to us, saying we don't need to tell you where we're spending our money. And we're not taking our greatest, most valuable resources out of the ground because that offends my personal small little ideology, even though secretly I have a lot of money invested in that very same product. There's a lot of conflict of interest there. The overview. The government can only spend public money with Parliament's permission. This can be done in two ways. Parliament can provide its permission through approval of appropriation bills, which generally provide permission to spend up to a certain amount of money in any given year. Alternately, Parliament also can provide ongoing permission to spend through continued legislation such as old age pension or old age security, as they're calling it here, as the Old Age Security Act. So when you hear the government trying to gaslight you, realize that there's only the money that's not already written down in legislation that the government or that the opposition parties want to see explained to them. And you should want that. You should not want these, any government, whether it be the Conservative, the Bloc, doesn't matter. Where in your mind do you want the government spending your money without you knowing where it's going? How is that good for your standard of living? How is that good for the lifestyle that you hope to have? How is that good for you and or your children or in any way, shape, or form? All right, so we'll come down to the major expenditures, what they're calling. And this graph showed you the dark, let's call it taupe, is the estimates for the years upcoming and how it's going to be 14% higher than it is, or at least it's gone up 14% higher than it was in 2019. The thin line, that's the amount of money they figure that the government is going to be making. So as you can see, the income is far outstripped by the amount of outgoing expenditures, which is something that we need to think about when we talk about this unmitigated, unbridled immigration importation, because these guys don't have any jobs and yet they're pulling on the system. That is definitely adding to our debt load. Now, I appreciate that people in their own countries can't get by or whatever the reason that they decide to move is. But that doesn't mean that we should be fiscally irresponsible, especially after having elected a person based on his business prowess, on his financial stability, on his financial ability. I feel like that's the one thing that the Carney government should be held to a standard on. I don't want to hear the same leeway given to Mark Carney as was given to Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau at least didn't have any economic background. Mark Carney was elected on having an economic background, and he should be very prudent with our money, not throwing it around and not telling us where it's going. That doesn't fit the profile of a person who is economically responsible. And economic responsibility, as you can see, is something that's going to be very important to most of us due to the fact that our debts are far outstripping how much money the government, the economy is generating. We can scroll down to the next one. Spending on health, well, that's going up through the roof. And as you can tell, the amount of money we got coming in is not even going to begin to cover it. So that means we're borrowing money. We're making a federal transfer payment of $54, but how much, $54 billion, but how much of that do we have to borrow? That's the question nobody seems to be asking, because we're not generating, we don't have a stimulation in our economy. Well, 0.5% did not generate the kind of money, $500 billion. There's just no way. If it did generate $500 billion, you would have seen the Liberals doing backflips down the House of Commons. They would have been throwing around a budget. So just take the proof what's in the pudding there. Now, this is the one that gets under my skin. Cost of servicing the public debt. Now, I get that I'm one of those individuals that doesn't really like to pay for interest payments. If I can avoid it, I do it, because it's money that they're basically, I mean, you're giving them money for owing them money. It seems a bit of a, I mean, I get that's the system. Unless you're, living in certain cultures, that's the system. However, it's not something that I'm excited about. I understand that there might be costs that cannot be avoided by the federal government, such as in the military or such as in natural disasters or those kinds of things. But how much money we owe and how much money we're paying for this debt, that can absolutely be avoided. Of course, as you can see, they had to increase the health payments this year so that they wouldn't be lower than the interest payments. But if we weren't paying that interest, we would be at $100 billion that we could be giving out to the hospitals. How many more doctors would that hire? How many times are hospitals and cities being limited not so much by the amount of people that require, but how much money we can offer. Why are we stopping at 54 billion? Should we not be going to the number that will solve the problem? You say we got 7 million people in Canada running around without a doctor. And I say, well, let's hire more doctors. And then the doctor says, well, there's only 54 billion. And we could be at 84 billion and hiring more doctors. But the government owes too much money in debt. The government is using $222 billion, and they're not even going to tell us why they're using it. And they don't plan on telling you again until the very next budget, which they, as shown by last year, are quite willing to hold until the last day of Parliament. So you might not ever find out until a week before Christmas how much money they plan on spending and where it went. So another 6 months, they're going to be running around the country, racking up the debt on your shoulders. Remember that. If you're a man, if you're a woman, if you're a liberal, if you're an NDP, if you're a conservative, if you're anywhere in between, every nickel you make, almost 3 cents of it is going to Mark Carney's government, and he's not even willing to tell you why he's spending it on what. He feels that he doesn't owe you that explanation. He feels that you don't merit the respect that goes along with me letting you know how I'm using your money and how I'm being responsible with it. He just feels like he got your vote and he doesn't need you anymore. So now he's got no time for you. Now the phone's been disconnected. He's ghosting you, to use a modern day vernacular. We're paying almost as much in interest as we are paying our doctors. Something is wrong with that math. And you would think an economist being at the helm, that would be the first thing that he worries about. Seems to me the only people that are worried about it are the guys that are not in office. I think you and I, as the voting population, no matter what stripe we happen to be from, should absolutely be worried about who's taking our money and what they're using it for. There are countries in the world that breaks it down, like France. They itemize what every penny is going for. On your paycheck, it's on your stub, where all your taxes went, like how much of it went to what. That's the kind of responsibility of a government that I appreciate. Now, I get that there might be systems in France that I don't approve of. Who knows? But being fiscally responsible is something that this entire nation needs to be talking about. Because we were already fooled by our desire to harm Donald Trump, who is ironically being fiscally responsible. Yet we have done nothing to ensure that whoever we did put in office is looking after our best interests. And by not offering a budget, we can never know what they're doing with that money. And that's all you hear the opposition parties talking about. We just want to know where the money is going. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. And it's not going to change the amount of money that get transferred to the doctor because that's already in legislation. It's not going to change how much money gets sent to the old age pension because that's already in legislation. So half of this expenditures is being put, $222 billion, is being put to stuff that we don't know what it is. The rest of it is already taken care of. They don't need a vote to spend it. Just like they didn't need to vote to spend the $73 billion that they got the governor general to force through. But why should we not be wondering where this $22 billion is going? Why would you not want to know where the taxes you're taking off your check is being used for? Do you not care? Did you not vote? Did you not want your government to look after your standard of living? Well, I'd like to know where the money is going, and I believe that it's a responsible position for any person who cares about the lifestyle that's going on around them. Now, I could be mistaken. Maybe I'm being overly romantic. You can let me know down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.